Last week here in the United States, we had another incident of mass murder committed by a gunman, a young man named Dylan Storm Roof, who is 21 years old, and he walked in to the historic Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and murdered 9 people, including the pastor of the church. And I'm probably not going to say anything about this that others haven't already said, probably with more eloquence or insight than I have to offer. But I do have some thoughts. The first is something that a lot of people have wondered since this incident occurred. A lot of people have noted that this crime, which was perpetrated by a white man against black folks in a historically black church that has been an important site in the civil rights movement, that is a sacred place, not just for people of the Christian faith, but for people who revere the struggle for black civil rights and who consider that to be a very noble part of our history, the black civil rights movement. And this crime was committed for, to me, overtly racist reasons. And one of the things that people have wondered in light of the strongly racist character of this crime is, why is the Confederate flag flying over the state capital of South Carolina? Why is the Confederate flag displayed so brazenly? Why do we tolerate its display as much as we do? Now, not all of us are happy about it, obviously. There are many people like myself who are disgusted by the sight of the Confederate flag, who shake our heads and wonder how anyone could possibly want to display this flag in public. But there are many other people, many of our fellow Americans, who consider this flag to be a symbol of pride and a symbol of heritage and a symbol of history. And I just cannot see that side of it. I mean, I understand what they're saying. I see it intellectually, but I don't understand why we do not consider privately, morally, if not legally, the display of the Confederate flag to be a form of hate speech. Because what else does that flag symbolize but an era in this country when slavery was a legal institution that some of us cherished so much and feared its abolition so much that we were willing to take up arms against our fellow Americans and fight and kill and die to protect it? That's what that flag symbolizes. And yes, you can say all the happy talk you want about, oh, it's history and it's heritage. A heritage of what? A heritage of a rebellion against the federal government of the United States based on a desire to defend and preserve the legal institution of slavery, where white men were able to legally own black people and force them into manual labor and have complete control over their lives, rob them of their freedom, rob them of their autonomy, rob them of their dignity. This was the institution that the Confederate Army went to war to defend. This was the institution that the South was so afraid of losing that it went to war to protect it. And the South lost that war, and that institution disappeared, although unfortunately not the racism that undergirded it. We're still stuck with that, but at least the legal institution itself was abolished. And yet people still fly the flag. And they fly it with pride. Sure, legally, if you want to display it, I don't think you should necessarily be stopped from that. I get the argument that it is a freedom of expression type of thing. That's fine. But in the name of decency, why do we tolerate this? Why is there not more social pressure to discourage people from flying this flag? Why do we not have more contempt for the sight of this flag? And surely, yes, of course, some of us do. But a lot of us don't. A lot of us, they say, oh, it's about heritage, not hate. And I just don't see how a thinking person who is aware of the history and the culture of this country, who has an ounce of compassion in him or her for his fellow American, especially for his fellow Americans who happen to be black and happen to live with the other side of that heritage, with the burden of that heritage, how anyone can proudly fly that flag. Perhaps you think it shouldn't symbolize hate. Perhaps you think it shouldn't symbolize slavery and racism and white supremacy, but it does. You don't get to make that decision. You don't get to decide what it symbolizes to other people. And because to many, many other people who are white, who are black, who are from all different ethnic and racial backgrounds, so many people find that flag to be utterly disgusting. How can a compassionate, thinking, feeling person with any sense of dignity and pride in themselves or their country even think of flying that flag, knowing what it represents? And not only do private citizens fly it without shame and fly it defiantly and fly it as a statement and still try to pretend that it's not about racism, it's not about white supremacy, it's about Dixie, it's about the romance of the South and all that lost cause horse shit that makes me nauseous when I think about it. And I can't even tolerate hearing it. It's so revolting to me because all it is a one big apologia for fucking racism. But not only do private citizens fly the flag, it's flown over the state capital of South Carolina. The government of South Carolina, the first state to secede from the Union to start the Civil War, the place where the Confederacy was fucking born. 150 years after the war that was supposed to have killed the Confederacy, the Confederate flag flies over the State House. Where is our decency? Where is our shame in this country when it comes to the Confederate flag? One of the other things that I think about in the wake of this shooting in Charleston is, why are we having a debate over whether or not this Charleston shooting was an act of terrorism? Why are some of us pretending as though this is a controversial question, whether or not we should declare it to be an act of terrorism? The gunman walked into a black church and murdered black people because they were black, and he said he did it with the purpose of igniting a race war. He said to these black folks that he was killing that he had to kill them because they were black. Now, when people in other countries, specifically Middle Eastern countries, where the people typically tend to be a little darker complected than a lot of us Americans, they speak a different language than we do, they come from a different ethnic background, they are, many of them, most of them, followers of a different religion than is typical here in the United States. When someone like that is influenced by external factors like religion or politics or culture and makes the decision to commit acts of mass murder, we call that terrorism. And we don't feel the need to fight with each other about it. We don't feel the need to wring our hands and go, oh, I don't know. We call it terrorism. That's what we have the word for. But when a white man who lives in the United States of America is influenced by external factors, one of which we know for sure is political or perhaps cultural in nature, racism, white supremacy, and he allows the influence of that factor to cause him to make the decision to commit an act of mass murder. Somehow, some of us are a little reticent, pardon me, from declaring that an act of terrorism. Well, the jury's still out. We better not call it terrorism yet. I don't know, as Jeb Bush said the other day. I don't know if it was an act of terrorism or not. I don't know. I don't even know if it was racially motivated. Who knows? Let's all just reserve judgment. You know, like we did after 9/11, when we all reserved judgment, when we all said, now, maybe this wasn't terrorism, maybe this wasn't Middle Eastern jihadists who did this. I know there's a lot of evidence pointing to that, but let's wait till the investigation has been concluded before we make that statement. Oh, what's that? We didn't do that. We couldn't wait to blame the brown people for it. We couldn't wait to blame the Muslims for it. But when it's a white guy killing black people for overtly racist, white supremacist motives, gee, I don't know. Should we really call that terrorism? Because to call it terrorism would be to implicate our own culture. Not ourselves as individuals. It's not saying that all of us are personally responsible for the shooting in Charleston, but our culture, our racist American culture that still promotes white supremacy, even if it doesn't mean to, even if it doesn't do it consciously, even if it doesn't do it with the intent of harming blacks or people of color, whatever they may be, even if it doesn't do it with the express motive of harming those people and holding them down and trapping them in poverty for the rest of their lives and sending them to prison in disproportionately large numbers and subjecting them to police brutality and prosecution in disproportionately large numbers compared to whites. Even if we don't mean to do any of those things, we still do them. And when it's brought up to us, we might care for a few days, but we don't really care because we let it continue to go on. And when something like this happens, when a white supremacist racist murders black people in a church because they are black, we don't even care enough to call him what he is, which is a fucking terrorist. Because to call him a terrorist is to acknowledge that the factors which in part led him to that act of terrorism are factors that we tolerate, that we even celebrate in some cases. See my previous rant about the motherfucking Confederate flag. To call it terrorism would be to implicate ourselves, would be to implicate our culture and our racism and our tolerance of racism. And our cowardice, our national cowardice when it comes to racism, when it comes to guns, when it comes to facing up to our history. We're cowards. As a nation, we are cowards. And as a nation, we have an incredible capacity for shared delusion and self-flattery. And that's why we see these things happen again and again and again. Because they happen, and we wring our hands, and we cry, and we say, oh, let's have peace. Let's forgive. Let's mourn, and then let's move on. And people like me, self-righteous, liberal white people like me, make videos like this where we give out a laundry list of problems and complaints. But the truth is, we really don't know what to do. I mean, I have ideas, as do many other people, of what we could do in theory, but none of that's ever going to fucking happen. Because we don't want it to happen. And as many of you who watch my stuff regularly know, I'm a fairly optimistic guy. But incidents like this really make me wonder if things in this country, as far as the subjects I've been discussing, are ever going to get any fucking better than they are. Because it's not just that the problems themselves are serious and complex, it's that we don't fucking care. Or at least not enough of us do. We don't care. there are solutions. There are things we could do legally and culturally to bring down the number of mass shootings, to address the crippling, devastating effect that racism has. We have solutions that we could try, but we're not gonna, because we don't think it's that important. Is it really even that much of a problem? Do we even really have to talk about it? I mean, it's been a few days. Why are we even still talking about it? Why am I even making a video about it? It's just going to upset people. And besides, why am I talking about it this time? I might as well have just sat this one out and waited a few weeks until the next one. Then maybe I wouldn't have felt like I was repeating myself so much. I don't know. Thank you for watching, if you're still watching. That's it.